So, all right. Okay. Yeah, I know. She's so mistreated, right? Yeah, she's terribly mistreated. All right, so today we're going to be talking about Jonathan Swift and Gulliver's Travels. And I'm going to break this down into different pieces. So we're going to talk about each piece individually. So the first piece we're going to talk about Jonathan Swift himself, and give you a little context for him. And then we'll move into kind of the characters of Gulliver's Travels, the overview of the main, like the races and whatnot, not individual characters. I'm not going that deep into this, except for Gulliver himself, and then the races that he comes across. We'll go through plot, and we'll go through some of the themes of the literature, and then we'll finish up with that. So to begin. No, we did not do a modest proposal. This is British literature, so Britlit 1. So Jonathan Swift was born November 30th, 1667 in Dublin, Ireland. He's an Anglo-Irish satirist, essayist, political commentator. He's a poet. And he also is a cleric. He became the Dean of St. Patrick's Cathedral in Dublin. So my eyes burn. And then throughout his education, he began his education. He was born poor, first of all. His father died about 7 months before he was born, so it was just him, his mother, and his sister. And we really don't know a whole lot about his childhood, except for like his education records and stuff like that. There's what is reported about his childhood is generally not agreed upon, right? Because we don't have enough evidence for people to come across and say, hey, this is what we agree upon, right? So what is agreed upon is that after the death of their father, his mother sent his sister and him to be raised by relatives. He was, some people say he was raised by an uncle, some of it as a cousin. And the problem is sometimes the language is not clear about cousins and uncles. We seem to have those two familiar relationships intertwined often within literature and whatnot. There's the relationship between Achilles and Patroclus is one of those that is convoluted by that. Whether Patroclus was Achilles' cousin or whether he was his nephew is in dispute, because there's evidence for each one of those claims. And a lot of literature of this time, they call people that are familiarly easy for me to say, related by blood, they'll call them cousin, even though they're not cousins. They're just because they're from the same family or same city or same part of the country, they'll call each other cousin. So he was educated at Kilkenny Grammar School. He entered there in 1673. And that's what we know. So at that point he would have been 7 years old. And in 1682 he was granted a BA by special grace from Trinity College, which a special grace degree means that he didn't do well in school. Like, they just passed him to get him out of their college. And in 1692, he attained a master's degree, Master of Arts from Hertford College, which is part of Oxford. It's one of the smaller colleges within Oxford. And then in 1702, from Dublin University, he was granted the title of Doctor of Divinity, which today would be a THD, which is a Doctorate of Theology. So He had a varied career in government and the church, as well as writing defenses of the church and its relationship to England. Swift is also recognized as a defender of Ireland. So his defenses of commercial practices and whatnot, kind of how they impacted Ireland. He wrote quite a bit. To your question, Free Needles, I was thinking of a different book, a more current book of Modest Proposal that has similar themes. It's kind of a rewriting, but we didn't read Swift's Modest Proposal either, because of time constraints. There's so much you have to cover. You're covering 1,200 years of literature in 16 weeks, and some of it's long. Okay, Totem Grower, thank you. And within that, instead of maintaining that English laws prevent the Irish from manufacturing anything to sell, he argues that the only items of commerce that the English don't restrict are Irish babies, and then puts forward that the Irish would be better off as cattle to be butchered than as a colony to be starved by the English. So he's not well received by the British, which is he shouldn't be. Absolutely should not be, because the British were brutal to the Irish. And I'm not here to give you a history class, but they're absolutely brutal to the Irish people. So even today, it's an ongoing issue. So the Drapier Letters in 1724 were Swift's response to continued subjugation of all aspects of lives, those living in Ireland by England. They aroused so much opposition that the English actually offered a reward of £300 sterling for the name of the author. So, and because they were published anonymously, because he knew they'd put his head on a pike. So although the Irish people knew he had written the letters, they made him a national hero. They didn't betray him. They didn't turn him in. Nobody turned him in, and so they made him a national hero instead. So in 1727, Swift visited England for the last time. Then he was declared mentally incompetent in 1742 by a British court, and died in 1745 and left his entire estate to charity. So that's what we know about his life. So when we look at the characters of Gulliver's Travels, we have Gulliver, he's the narrator and the protagonist of the story, and Gulliver's narration, right? He has a very vivid style of narration. Makes it clear he's very intelligent, well educated, right? But he's still very naive and gullible, and as far as his viewpoints of the world, right? So he's book smart, but he's not street smart, right? He has virtually no emotional life as a narrator, and his comments are strictly factual, right? He's just relating the facts. Gulliver never thinks that the absurdities he encounters through all the people that we're going to talk about, he never thinks that those encounters are funny. He never makes satiric comments about it, or even about his own home, right? So by not commenting on it, right, he draws attention to the absolute absurdity of it all for the reader. We're just like, how can you not make a comment about this? And so he invites the reader to make those comments about the absurdity to themselves. So it becomes a more interactive process for him to read Gulliver's Travels, simply because he's giving you the 2 plus 2. He's not giving you the 4. He's making you answer the 4. So he's very naive, and just kind of is reporting rather than writing stories and things like that. So the first group of people he comes across on his little voyage are the Lilliputians, right? They're tiny people. They're small. They're 6 inches tall, right? So they're like action figures, right? Their country is a monarchy. And there are 2 Lilliputian civilizations. There's Lilliput and there's Blefuscu, right? And they've been at war with each other for generations, right? On each society's interpretation of their religious texts and how it says that you're supposed to crack a soft-boiled egg. Okay? Let that resonate. So, when Gulliver wakes up, right, after a shipwreck, when he wakes up, he's basically tied down, and the Lilliputians are basically shooting arrows and stuff at him, which to him is nothing more than a pinprick, right? But the Lilliputians want to use him as a weapon to end the war, right? So he sits down and talks to them about England, and so he sits down and talks about England. He makes a comparison between what's going on in the land of the Lilliputians and what's going on in England, and they say that where he's from, they must have been smaller than themselves, right? Because no one would fight over something so trivial when he's talking about the wars and things like that. This Parliament must be the smallest men in existence, right? So there's his political commentary, right? So he's creating a philosophical construct through the Lilliputians, right? The Lilliputians are epistemologists, okay? So I'll copy and paste that in the chat real quick. Epistemologists, okay? Epistemology is the theory of knowledge, especially with regard to its methods, validity, and scope. Epistemology is the investigation of what distinguishes justified belief from opinion, right? And the Lilliputians are meant to symbolize misplaced human pride and point out Gulliver's inability to diagnose it correctly, because he's very proud of his own country, and so it's one of those things that leads you to nationalism and copy and paste this as well in a second. So this is what epistemology is. The next group of people we're going to talk about, and the next group he visits, right, and we'll go through the whole plot thing here in just a little bit, are the Brobdingnagians, right? Brobdingnagians are giants. So he lands in the land of the Brobdingnagians, and now he is the Lilliputian, okay? And effectively, the Brobdingnagians are the aristocracy of the world at the level they would see themselves, okay? They're 100-foot giants. They're called Epicureans. Epicureans is a person who's devoted to sensual enjoyment, especially that derived from food and drink. So, many of us may find ourselves to be Epicureans, right? It's a philosophy of sensual pleasure, but not hedonism. So, it's not hedonistic. It's no throwing off of all morality and all social virtues and all that stuff, and just throwing caution to the wind and doing whatever you want to do. It is a very specific type of sensual enjoyment derived from food and drink. The people who love the way different textures of food, different flavors of wine, that kind of thing. So it's one of those guys, right? So when it comes to the Brobdingnagians, he is kept as a pet. He's dressed in doll clothes, and they make him dance around. He's an oddity. He's a cultural oddity, right? So these people are cultural elitists. Everything smaller than them is beneath them, and so, but he's treated well, right? Yes, yeah, absolutely, free meals, yeah. Epicureanism is kind of sensory enjoyment based off of food and drink. It's really the sensory of taste and texture and that kind of thing. Whereas hedonism is much more sensual pleasure writ large, right? So everything that's sexual and that's sensory pleasure from without limitations. Okay. He's treated well by the king and queen of the Brobdingnagians, and they end up symbolizing a close scrutiny of the human condition and the finer points of our existence at close range. So he's able to see like the pores of their skin up close. He's able to hear the thunderous, raucous sound of their urination, right? And it makes him sick to his stomach. Their sexuality, right? And their own stench, right? Their own kind of their own kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of scent, right? Everybody smells a little different than other people. He's able to kind of take that in on a macro scale because they are so big, right? Like it's kind of the difference between one cow and 100 cows, right? One cow, you don't really smell them that much, right? But if you got 100 cows, you're going to smell that. And so he's kind of at that level. And so he's able to kind of look at them as people think they're better than everyone else, but at the end of the day, they're just the same as everybody else, right? The people who sit back and go, well, I'm better than you because I was born in this house or that house or whatever, or I have this and you don't have that, right? His point at the end of the day is we all stink and we all have to pee, we all die. When we die, they put us in the same size box, right? And they shove us in the ground. And so that's kind of his realization as he's hanging out with the Brobdingnagians. Then the next group of people are the Laputas. They are a group of scientists, right? Laputa is the land that they're in. It's an experimental land, and it's an island floating in the sky. It's a floating kingdom. It's meant to represent the Royal Academy of London, right? And here in the United States, it would be the National Endowment for the Humanities. That's what he would be making fun of. In the United States, they're the government entity that gives grants to prove ideas, right? They're the people who do studies that tell us that, that salt is salty, right? That, some people think milk's too white or whatever it is. They're that kind of thing. When you read those studies, like science, a study shows blah blah blah, something that's common sense. That's the National Endowment for the Humanities, who's given people grant money to study that thing that no one needed to study, but somebody wanted, objective evidence to prove that whatever it is was true or real. So the Royal Academy of London is filling that place within England. And every room that he goes into leads him farther down the rabbit hole of madness, right? So he's really making fun of the Renaissance man, right? The people who question things and want to prove science and rely on science and move away from faith and religion and the idea that there are things that man should not know. He's really kind of poking fun at them. By saying that nothing is truly knowable, right? Which is an idea that comes back around in the 20th century, right? And so it becomes within the 20th century, it gets labeled as nihilism, right? They say that nothing is truly knowable. That's that word. So they come back around to that, right? And they say nothing is truly knowable, therefore nothing is truly real. We can't prove anything. All we can do is have our perceptive realities and whatnot. And they have no faith, no trust in anything, right? And so that's where he ends up going. So through this, right, 18th century Enlightenment brought with it intellectual experimentation and theorization, right? And Swift very much, he kind of preferred traditional knowledge that had been tested over centuries and mistrusted this new age, new ideas, all this newfangled science stuff, right? And so the Laputans don't symbolize reason, right? Because they're carrying out experiments that have absolutely no reason for them to do so. They're just silly shit, right? They're asking questions, which we'll go through some of them here in a little bit when we go through the plot stuff. But they're not symbolizing reason itself, but that the pursuit of a form of knowledge that is not directly related to the improvement of human life. So they're asking questions that don't really matter, right? Like, why are liquids wet? Do we need, right? What do we need that? Well, because they're all, they have to be soluble, right? There has to be some way to absorb them. So, but that type of question, right? Does it really enhance or improve human life? No, not really. It's just knowledge for the sake of knowledge, and so that's what he's poking fun at. That's what he's arguing against. And then he goes to the Wenhams, right? The Wenham land, right? This society functions without a government, right? There's no government there. Everyone is equal. It is an egalitarian society. It runs on intellect. It is devoid of ambition. It is not corrupt. There's no humanity, right? Here, they are. If you're a Star Trek fan, these folks are Vulcans, right? Without a fact, without a doubt, these people would be considered the Vulcans, right? Now, the Wenhams, right, are horse people. That's why their name sounds like a horse whinnying. They are horse people, right? They are devoid of emotion, and they are true Stoics, right? So if you don't know what a Stoic is, there's a couple different definitions here. So Stoicism is an ancient Greek school of philosophy. Grab that right there. An ancient Greek school of philosophy founded in Athens by Zeno of Citium. The school taught that virtue, the highest good, is based on knowledge. The wise live in harmony with the divine reason, also identified with fate and providence, that governs nature and are indifferent to the vicissitudes of fortune and to pleasure and pain, the endurance of pain or hardship without the display of feelings and without complaint. Okay, so that's what it means to be a Stoic. Is you're effectively, if you read this and then you look at these people are horse people, they become draft horses. They become beasts of burden. They don't complain. They don't whine. They just keep moving through because this is what has to be done. And so there's no ambition. They don't want to be higher than what they are. There's no corruption. They're not trying to get one over on anybody else. There's no emotion. This is just what the world is, and so we have to work through it. Now, Gulliver wants to stay and live with these people, right, because he feels like he doesn't fit anywhere else, and this is the place that he wants to fit. Remember back at the beginning, I said that he is devoid of any type of emotional life. At least he doesn't show it. So the Wenhams are the people that he identifies with the most, right, because he feels like he is more like them. Now, he is not allowed to stay. He is sent home because he looks a lot like a group called the Yahoos. The Yahoos are the Wenham's beast of burden, and they look a lot like humans. Okay, so he is an odd curiosity to them, right? And they want to breed him with other Yahoos to make smarter animals, right? That's what they want. They want to make a smarter animal, right? This is slavery. This is what slavery is. This is how slavery was handled. This is Swift's commentary on it, and the way it strikes his character, the way his character Gulliver is actually sickened by the idea, is a commentary on how people should view slavery, right? If it were done to you, how would you respond? But because it's being done to others, people didn't really care. And so they want to make smarter animals. And so when he returns home and on his voyage home, he begins to view all humans, even his own wife and children, right, as Yahoos, as being nothing more than slaves to the grind, as beasts of burden, as creatures that have their lot in life, and that's all there is to it. And so those are the four kind of groups of folks that he goes to visit, right? All right. Okay. So there's the characters. We'll come back. I got some questions listed there. I was reading through those really quickly, so we'll come back to some of those in a bit. So there's the characters and a bit about Jonathan Swift's life.